Welcome to the show. I am thrilled to have Katie Harris, co-founder and executive director of Let's Talk LD. Hi, Katie.
I am thrilled to be here. You have no idea. I am a huge fan, and I've been looking forward to this conversation. It's been a long time coming.
It has been a long time coming. And I think the biggest challenge of today will be to really keep us to about 30 minutes. And that will
Okay.
be our biggest challenge today, only because wow, there is so much to talk about. But maybe before we kind of launch into our plans, I wonder if you could educate and help our audience know who you are.
Of course. Of course. Well, I'm going to first talk about what I think is our extraordinary organization, Let's Talk LD. And really, it was born of a family really wanting to kind of codify their lived experience as they tried to navigate the special education ecosystem. And I just know that we had a lot of tears cried by both our children. Both of my children are children who are neurodivergent, and my husband is neurodivergent. And we had a lot of tears, and we just really felt we really wanted to create a space that people could come as community and really not have to reinvent the wheel. That was really why we decided to found this nonprofit. It was really designed to be a place. Look, in our community, there's a lot of isolation.
Yes.
There is some shame. And
Yes.
we really wanted to create a space where people could coalesce and say, it's okay. And we got each other. And that was really it. So we are single-mindedly focused around issues of equity and social justice. I think that's one of the things that makes us very different from a lot of the organizations that are out there. That centers all of our work. And I think another thing that makes us different is a lot of organizations really do kind of specialize in one area, either parent education or student advocacy or teacher training and development. And we function like a three-legged stool. We do all three because we feel like as we've navigated the special ed system, we recognize that part of the problem and the reason why there was so little progress being made was because those things sit in silos and never the twain shall meet. And we were determined to really figure out ways to bring those separate kind of communities together in very productive ways to ensure that ultimately we could work in the best interest of the child. And so that has worked for us. So that's essentially us. My background is as an educational reformer. I started as an educator back in the early 80s. Uh, so I've got a little bit of mileage on me. And I really had built a career focused on addressing the needs of children who were underserved or marginalized in what used to be termed the inner city. And I graduated from USC. And so I had a lot of opportunities through their volunteer programs to connect with extraordinary communities that were focused around educating children who were notably underserved, typically children of color. And then when I had my own two children, we discovered that they were neurodivergent, and just that process of discovery, just navigating child time was a whole nother area of challenge. But I really just shifted gears and took everything I knew about serving, kids who were poorly served and really turning that into advocating for children who are neurodivergent.
Which is actually a really I would imagine a very smooth transition in the sense that we tend to find that our neurodivergent students
Correct.
are underserved. So it is what a wonderful life experience to it's like a marriage of wonderful things that came to play for you, and you are a force. I mean, you are a force in
Oh,
our
thank
community,
you,
a
Gwen.
powerful, wonderful, positive force in our community. I really like that idea of how do we take what is being researched. We often talk about science-based, empirically based evidence to inform education and to inform what we do and how we serve our students and how we serve our community. But there is such a big gap. So the
Oh, huge.
siloed piece is huge. And it's just like, why aren't we doing what we know we should be doing? It's like, oh, I guess we don't know. We don't know. I mean, so there's so many pieces here. And so that's wonderful. I know that one of your specialty or like passion projects, which is not even a project because you were doing a
Yep.
serious thing surrounding it, but is disability identity development.
Yes,
Can
it's
we? Can
huge.
you? It's huge. Can you define this for the audience?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I've discovered in my work, and frankly from my own lived experience, which my work, a lot of what I do in my work is drawn from personal experience. That's a thing that makes this work so rich for me. But what I've discovered is when it comes down to it, having an affirmative and a positive kind of identity formation around one's disability is oftentimes the difference between someone who's become self-actualized and is able to kind of move on and transition into life as a self-determined, independent, effective self-advocate, and those who cannot. So really, disability identity is really about a context, creating opportunities for students starting very young to really understand, go through that journey of understanding who they are as individuals across all of their intersectionalities. For the students that we work through, of course, their being neurodivergent is a huge part of it, but also their gender. It could be their sexual identity, sexual orientation. It could be across race or ethnicity. And so really having a real appreciation for their full body mind is so critically important to having a positive and affirmative identity for. And it's my sense that if we can really help these young people connect to who they are, the fullness of who they are, what people say makes them broken, but what makes them whole, valued individuals. I think that's going to be the secret sauce to us being able to improve outcomes for these young people as they transition into adulthood.
Yeah, knowing, understanding deeply who you are. And that identity is made up of so many pieces
Correct.
as you mentioned, that having that awareness is not only empowering for the individual, it also helps their support system support them in finding fulfilling finding fulfilling purposeful lives. I'm pretty laser focused on preparation for adulthood,
Yes.
because we spend most of our life in adulthood. Um, and how do we create um, even a schedule of fulfillment, that we can even get that, rubber meets the road kind of simplified, practical, right? But we can't do that if we don't know and we don't have maybe the words to symbolize who we are.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Having that sense, metacognitively, and this is an area that I think really needs to have tremendous amounts of focus, particularly as kids are really starting to begin that journey of understanding who they are. You don't know what you don't know. So we have to create these contexts for young people to really engage in discovery. And I think that typically in the disabled community, look, there is a tremendous amount of shame and isolation. And so creating that space to build community, right? There's force numbers, there's power in numbers. That's the cliche. And it is so true for our community, really creating a space where young people can develop in spaces that are affirming, right? That help them understand that their capital is people who are neurodivergent and however else they identify has value, has importance, and having communities that follow them throughout their entire life as they prepare for that transition into adulthood, that is critically important.
Yeah, and a life skill. I mean, I think from a mental health perspective, which again, you and I are probably biased in regards to thinking about
Yes,
emotional and mental health,
yes,
and how important actually it is, maybe even more so than sometimes, getting an A on a test or studying for math,
correct.
right? How do we encode and live in the world in a way that I'm comfortable and empowered, is such a critical piece. I love this idea of creating context for discovery. And something that I face and bump up against is that it's not that the a person that I'm supporting doesn't know, it's that they haven't been asked the right questions
Yes,
to drive introspection or self-reflection. I will include parents in that as well.
yes,
Um, but it's amazing that when you provide a framework, and you ask the right questions and you meet the person where they are for a tangible product, whatever that is, whether it's through art or words or sculpture or 3D, whatever that is, through movies and whatever, however way you want to approach this. Um, there is something really magical, and I use the word magic sauce too for this, which is, oh, I actually get to see myself versus mask myself to fit into
Yes.
the greater context of my community.
Oh, look, it's absolutely huge. And, I always say, someone told me this, but I stole it. And they were talking about, look, when you're making your child smaller, your child's world smaller rather than larger, that becomes a problem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And what we really don't want when I do the parent education work that we do, what we really are trying to focus on with parents is helping them understand that your kind of projections of what your child cannot do makes their world smaller. And it's incredibly important when they're younger to make their world as large as it possibly can be. And I know our parents, because I am a parent also, who understands the anxieties that come with your children failing and over again in some aspects of their life and the impact to their being, and how as a parent you want to be protective, and so you want to kind of mitigate that by diminishing the possibilities of failure. But it's just, in my mind, the wrong way of approaching it. You really have to create these spaces for your kids to engage in that self-discovery. And, when my children were younger, when we were new at this whole game, I mean, we didn't know what we were doing, my husband and I, but we just knew that to try to make our kids' world as big as possible. So we exposed them to everything. We were at LACMA on the weekends, paid in the children's program on Saturday. And I've talked to other parents about that, and they're like, oh, but my kid's so hyper and they make noise or they stim or so, so it's all right. It's okay, right? And so creating those spaces for your kid to really understand what is it that they're passionate about? What about life that they love, and what can they align their talents in doing, whether it's art or music, or maybe they're a natural leader. They may be dyslexic and have difficulty with reading, but they may be an extraordinary oral communicator who is a real leader by their nature. And so as parents, it's our responsibility. And I would argue as an educator, it's also our responsibility for centering the voices of these young people and creating a space for them to be able to connect to what makes them powerful and what makes them extraordinary.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And that experience is the vehicle for that. Even if
Yes.
we think about cognitive profiles,
Yes.
abstraction is incredibly difficult. I mean, when abstraction, inferences, deductions are hard already, we can't just talk about this.
That's
We've
it.
got to expose, and we have to let experience really give us the information that we need. And I feel very strongly about that, even from vocational planning. When we think about careers, it's really about doing a lot of rotations, trying a lot of internships. You might get close to it based on your interests and your preferences, strengths, vulnerabilities.
Yep.
Obviously, like, you can get close to it, but knowing exactly what is really going to create love for what you're doing, really does take doing and doing it over and
Absolutely.
over.
Our kids, the reality is that the studies are clear that our kids do better with applied work. They tend to be, even if they're not naturally a kinesthetic learner, they
Yeah.
do better with applied work. One of our advisors, Shay Plasman, extraordinary researcher, and we lost him from the West Coast to the Midwest. But one of the things that he's done is he's done this extraordinary research and written these amazing papers that talk about the importance of career technical education, frankly, as a means by which kids are able to connect to their talents and their passions. And what his research has stated is that it is the likelihood not only of kids matriculating into college and developing interest in college, particularly those students with disabilities, but also for graduating from college. And I know that's a huge issue. It's one of those things, you and I have discussed this before, cliff that happens once kids graduate from secondary school and they attempt to move on to post-secondary life. It's like a brick wall
Yeah.
for our kids. And
Yeah.
I know that's one of the reasons that we Let's Talk LD, we really do focus on continuing to hold our parents' hands and our students' hands, and even educators,
Yeah.
and building a bridge between secondary life and post-secondary life, because the struggle is real for
It's
sure for our young people,
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like the resourcing drops off too because,
for sure.
I think we have a really good sense of what to do in early childhood. I
Yes.
do feel like we've gotten a nice stronghold there in regards to how we think about it, maybe how we might choose different types of interventions or therapies. We're not doing too badly there, but when you leave secondary education, you're not just going from ninth to 10th to 11th to 12th grade anymore. And I think
Correct.
there's a comfort in the progression through education. And then when you leave the district, when you leave secondary education, it's a wild, wild west.
For sure.
Every choice is an option. How in the world do you reduce the field and understand what the path might be? And I think we circle back to that idea of knowing who you are, going
Oh, for
back to
sure.
identity development.
Look, here's the I'm in the middle of study. I know some people are going, "What in the world, lady? You know how old you are?" And I'm like, "Yes, I do, and I'm never going to stop learning." And I just feel like leveraging this work and being in community with other educators who are interested in scholarship. One of my big pet peeves is there's so much research out there and very little of it trickles down where it needs to be, whether it's into families or into the student advocacy work that needs to happen, or whether it's into colleges and universities that are receiving our kids, but really, frankly, have no idea what to do with them. But one of the things that I always find so ironic is we kind of have our kids progress through their compulsory education. And then they get to about 11th or 12th grade when we start to think about transition planning, which, by the way, is way too late. It should be happening in middle school, but that's a whole nother conversation. And somehow our kids have to get permission for everything. Can I go to the restroom? You got to raise your hand. You have to ask permission. Can I go have a drink of water? Whatever you do in a classroom, or in a school ecosystem is permission based. Kids are given no opportunity to exercise that muscle, to really build a muscle around making choices and independence and really doing those things that they feel are affirming. And then they hit 11th and 12th grade and then they graduate and then they're told, okay, now go figure it out. But yet, for 12, 13 years, they've been given no opportunity
Yep.
whatsoever to practice that muscle. They've given no opportunity for independent thinking, right? And for
Yep.
self-sufficiency, for self-advocacy, even the way our IEPs are run. It's hard enough for parents to have some sense of power, because there is a huge power imbalance in IEP meetings, even though parents are supposed to come into these situations as equals. But our children are almost always absent. We required our children to come to IEP starting in third grade. We were like, if they can sit there only for the first 20 minutes, I wanted school district officials to be able to straighten, know that they were dealing with a person and not a piece of paper,
Yeah.
plain and simple.
Yes.
And the sense of empowerment that a child feels, being able to sit there, and we start the meeting off by saying, this is your meeting, and we want to understand what you think you need. So sometimes it got our kids in trouble because sometimes they were really effective at self-advocacy and they were saying to educators, that doesn't work for me. I don't learn that way, right? But we have to create environments, cultures in our schools where kids' experiences are centered, particularly for our more marginalized learners. It's so critically important. So I know that's one of the things I'm exploring in my dissertation is that connection between that journey of identity and positive and affirming disability identity development and connecting the dots to post-secondary outcomes and the improvement of post-secondary outcomes. And not just in college, but also in career and civic engagement, which is so important.
Absolutely. Because there is competence there, and that's another, the presumption of competence is something that we explore a lot on this channel,
Yeah.
with a lot of professionals. we need to presume competence. And it's not that the person is always right. That's not what
Correct.
presumption of competence is, but that we know that they want to and can learn. They want to
Absolutely.
be a part of their life. And, I agree with you. When we don't provide the opportunity to exercise these muscles,
Yes.
um, to exercise who am I, what I need, um, exercise advocacy. I don't learn that way, or it's hard for me to
Yeah.
learn that way, right? I learn better this way. Can I, um, when we're promoting this, if we don't give those opportunities, or we continue to prompt and support where prompting and supporting is not needed, the meta message is we do not believe you are capable of doing this.
Yes.
And so,
Absolutely.
it's something for us to be more mindful of. And again, I feel like we're surrounded by very, very well intentioned
Yes.
people. And it's more about like tools, practice, systems, models that can be used easily and simply, in these very complex and very overburdened taxed resource systems.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we look at our teacher training and development, one of the things, first of all, when I'm brought into schools, I know that most of the educators in the room really are kind of proverbially just rolling their eyes. Just another thing that I have to pile on and figure out how to shoehorn into what I'm doing. And I always start all of our PDs with this idea that this, these interventions, these ideas, these insights about how you might sharpen the tools in your toolbox are really designed for every learner. Because I truly, truly believe that the things that we're trying to encourage educators to do to reform how they approach education are to reach the broadest spectrum of learners. And our kids are going to rise when those opportunities are provided, no doubt about that. But it's really designed for every learner in your classroom to become more fully realized as a learner in the school ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's good practice, right? It's good
Absolutely.
practice for any learner. And back to the idea of, you brought up shame and isolation, which
Yes.
is a serious thing that happens. I call these the moral diagnoses, the lazy, the not trying hard enough, you don't care. These types of moral diagnoses that get assigned because things remain ambiguous, or we don't understand a learner's profile. We don't
Correct.
understand who they are. Again, back to identity,
Yes.
because this is where we go back to. Um, how do we address that so that, because what happens, I mean, shame squashes and makes things little, right? If we
Of
want to
course.
go for expansive um and bigger opportunities, more options, more choices, this type of, then we have to do something differently. And so, yeah, it's not about doing more, right? It's about
That's
doing
right.
something smarter or in a different way.
Oh, absolutely. And look, I think that the key really is working across constituencies, right? I think so often we do get in our silos, and if we're focused on student advocacy, that's what we do. But the fact of the matter is, students cannot be fully realized individuals without existing in family units and family communities are also affirming, right? So that means we also have to engage in parent education, right? To make sure that the environment that the student is kind of existing in is really going to be supporting for that individual. Well, then, our students have to go to schools, right? So if the school ecosystem is unhealthy, just ecologically unfit for the child being able to become fully realized and to start to develop those muscles and then exercise them, then that's a problem. So we have to work in concert across those constituencies to ensure that the student ultimately, and of course you have to work with the student because they have to be able to understand the importance of really developing those muscles. We're developing this program I almost say we have to do it sadly because we recognize how much isolation and shame our young people feel. And it's called Reimagining Failure. And the program was specifically designed because as I talked with young people, including my own children, it was this common theme of people being told all the things throughout their entire life since they were very young children that they couldn't do. Being told by even teachers, you're a loser, or parents that you're a loser and you're a failure and you didn't. And I said, we really have to change the language around failure. We can't stop people from using that term. So we've got to now change the mindsets of our students. So when they hear that, they're not triggered into isolation and feeling small, but they're seeing failure as an opportunity because, as we know, any great innovation that has happened in the world has happened because the person who was the innovator failed many, many times before they finally succeeded. And
Yeah.
so what we're trying to do is to help students understand that failure is a critically important part of success. It's how you develop instincts about whether a relationship is good or not that you're existing in. It's how you develop instincts about how to develop a best practice self to be successful, whatever the domain may be, whether it's school or work or what have you. And so we really have to start thinking about failure very, very differently.
Yeah. I mean, and that's like beautifully, I mean, studied by Carol Dweck, right? This idea
Yes,
of growth mindset. Um, and that really failure is a symptom of trying
that's
and
it.
engagement. Like,
That's it.
you know,
That's it.
and so how do we define that? And you're right, back to that IEP experience. So many of my clients that I work with don't want to be part of that IEP because it's never been structured in a way in which it started with empowerment. Always left feeling like it's everything that's wrong with me. It's everything that I can't do,
That's it.
right?
Deficit based. That's right.
Yes.
Everything is deficit based. So the medical
Yes.
model still continues to
Yes.
be rooted in everything that happens and washes over our children,
That's
and
right.
really trying to evolve mindsets of the adults in these children's lives where they
Yes.
understand the social model, which is designed to not try to fix or not try to, suggest that it is the student that is the problem. It is the environment, the barriers that are in place, the institutional barriers that are in place that are making it difficult for our kids to be
Yep.
able to navigate towards success. And
Yep.
so I think really helping educators understand, it's always fun. I mean, look, I went to grad school in education. I'm getting my doctorate in education. And it's so interesting how these things do take hold. And like you say, most educators are well-meaning, compassionate people who love children. If
Mhm.
you were to tell them that this is the harm that has caused some of these approaches that have been tried and true, but they have not worked, they're devastated when they hear it because part of the problem is our teacher education program. I
Yeah.
mean, that's just it. And so I think by creating a space for educators and parents to exist as a community of practice with students to really figure out what works and what really doesn't work, and how do we involve our practices in a way that ultimately center the voices of young people and that are affirming rather than diminishing for young people. I think that is really, again, the key.
Yeah, lovely. It's so lovely. I mean, Katie, you and I could go on. I mean, we could continue this
Yes,
conversation for days, and we will. I mean, I think, maybe even coming back and talking about really practical tools, tips, strategies for
would love
parents
that.
would be something that would be so great. Um, because being able to inspire hope in the small things is really, I think, so helpful, right? It's like, oh, it's one little tweak, it's a pivot, it's not more, it's just different, and it doesn't have to be anything perfect. It's something different, and so I'd love for us to do that, and come
I
back and
would
talk about
love the opportunity. I have to tell you, that's really it. With one of my dear friends, I was working with her son. Her son ended up moving in with us for 2 weeks. Just because I said, look, I just wanted to create a space to figure out what's going on. He was having difficulty, quote unquote, launching. And I said, I want you to start with just identifying goals that you have. And that as a process was like pulling teeth
I
because
know.
no one had ever really bothered to ask, what are your goals? What do you think you're really good at? What do you think you'll be doing? And nobody asked that question. And so just that process. was a challenge. So again, creating those opportunities for kids to not only get to know themselves better, but for parents to get to know their children better and what it is that they love and that they're really passionate about is so important.
So
And I
important.
look forward to those conversations with you in the future. I
Yes,
really
let's do it.
do.
Well, KD, if anyone is listening to this and is interested or curious about Let's Talk LD, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you or the organization?
Of course. Well, they can always go on our website and all of the information is there. It's letstalkld.org, plain and simple. So just reach out. I think an easy Google search will get you there as well. And the phone number and all of the contact information is there online.
Perfect. And I'll put that in the description below for the audience
Appreciate
as
it.
well.
Thank
Katie,
you so
thank
much.
you.
What a pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute delight, Dr. Gwen. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure.
Back at you. Thank you.